Hi, everyone. Welcome to Optimize for Humans. My name is Usha. I'm an executive coach and consultant and your podcast host. And in this podcast, we explore what AI transformation really looks like when it's optimized for humans, both the humans who make up your organizations and the humans you serve with your organizations. Um, I'm really excited to be speaking with Danoosh Kapadia today. Danoosh, thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to kick off by having you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit of what excites you about this topic.
All right. Hi, Usha. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm Dhanush. I'm an AI educator and strategist. I work with executives, business owners, essentially the people that are in charge of a P&L that need to make, big, complex, high stakes strategic decisions. I teach them how to use AI as a strategic thinking partner. So, use it to help them make better decisions, build strategy, scenario plan, not just write emails.
I love that. I'm very excited for this conversation because I think you bring this like really interesting perspective around how leaders in particular can really leverage AI in a new way. And I'm kind of holding this perspective around like how can we create the right conditions for within organizations so that it's truly like AI transformation, not just adoption, but there's real impact that's happening within that. And I think as we meld that, we'll have something really interesting. And what we wanted to do today for our listeners is actually to run an example through our thinking together, so you get a sense of like what would we advise if we were consulting and supporting a leader. So we came up with Rachel. This is completely just a persona. We don't know who Rachel is, but we're gonna find out by the end of this episode. Rachel, who is a CMO of a healthcare services company. It's a B2B company with 2,000 people. And Rachel has been handed um, from the board, Rachel has been handed the mandate to cut costs by 20%. The board has invested a lot in AI and they'd like to offset some of that cost. So that's kind of a generic scenario we're starting with. I'm sure it'll be familiar to lots of leaders out there. So, Danush, I'll start with you. What would you advise? Like, where should Rachel start?
So I'll start by saying that, most leaders that I talk to when they first come to me in our initial conversation, they're really smart about AI. They've read everything that's, in HBR, so on and so forth. But when I ask them, the pointed question of like, how do you actually, Rachel, how do you use AI in your day-to-day work? Usually the answer I get back is, oh, I use it to like, write emails and talking points, blog posts, things of that nature. And that's where I generally begin the conversation of like, okay, well, let's actually put it through the paces. You're using it like you have a Ferrari in your driveway and you're using it to buy milk and eggs, but let's actually put it through the paces of what it's capable of with, PhD level smarts, and let's have it help you think through a complex decision. So let's say in this example scenario that we're talking about, Rachel's been tasked with cutting costs, right? And so she's thinking, well, I gotta get the same amount of work done with less resources. So, you know, probably the first thing that's coming to mind is like, do I need to cut people? Do I need to replace people with AI? And that's probably not the right way to jump into this, right? And so if she were to bring AI into the picture, what I would advise her is, hey, Rachel, maybe first sit down and really put pen to paper and frame like what is the decision that you have to make, right? So if she's thinking about whether to cut her content team, that's actually not the real decision in front of her. The real decision is, how do I reallocate creative capacity in a world where the cost of creating content is collapsing to zero because of AI, right? And that's a completely different frame, and it opens up a completely different set of options. right? Because now what Rachel can think about is, well, okay, if we bring AI in, does my team know how to use it? Is it going to create AI slop? What do my people need to be doing? What do they need to be, delegating to the AI? How does taste and judgment play a role here so that the content that's created feels differentiated, feels like us, feels like our brand, our voice, our work, our ideas, and not just kind of something that's regurgitated that's regurgitated by a machine and sounds like everything else that's on social media.
Yeah, I like that you're kind of calling out the grooves that have started to be established with this conversation. I think there's often this kind of mandate that comes of like, go do AI. And I think the two grooves are like the tools, like what tools do we need, and the tool adoption piece. And I think the second groove has been headcount reduction. And I like that you're like pulling Rachel back, if you will, in this fictional scenario. But um, to actually think about this more holistically. And that's definitely, I think, what I would advise as well, which is let's start with what you're trying to achieve. Like, what is your starting point and what is your desired future state? And actually, first of all, like, does that even is your desired future state today the same as the one you had in 2023 before AI really kind of blew up on the scene, right? Like, what's changing about the impact you can have as a result of what's now available to you. And, I think there's the one thing I always want to caution leaders with is like, stop trying to go from A to B faster. There needs to be a bigger conversation of actually what is A and what is B. Where are we really now? Like, what are the new capabilities we've got available to us? And what does it look like to get from here to what's really possible in terms of the impact that we want to have? And how can AI really support that transition as part of that? And what I really liked about how you framed it as well is like there's multiple levers and options at play, and each one it feels like it's such a net of connected things. Like you press a button here, it affects something there. You press a button there, it affects something here. And I think we actually need to get really good at starting to think through like upstream and downstream of and like really looking at the system as a whole. I'm curious how that pans out in what you've seen in the work that you're doing with leaders.
Yeah, I think to your point, like it's really important to start with like what are the business objectives that we're trying to
Yeah.
accomplish here, and then think about the tools and the resources and the people and how do we figure out you know what stays with a human,
Yeah.
what gets delegated to the AI, what's that messy middle where it's a collaboration between the human and the AI.
Yeah.
So, for example, like that's kind of one of the first decisions that any leader has to make. And when you think about it, you kind of think like, okay, we should kind of offload some of the low level, task level work to the AI, which is, that's
Yeah.
not a bad thing. Um, and how do we kind of get it to help us prepare for meetings. A great example there is in the pre-AI world, let's say there's a marketing team meeting and there's six people that are coming together. Each person would have to go download some information, download a report from one of the marketing systems, make sense of it, and then come to the meeting with some insights, and then have a conversation around that, and then there's action items and cleanup and so on and so forth. So when you kind of actually break that apart, there's so many like micro tasks that happen in a workflow like that. So let's say we bring AI into the equation. A really smart way to do this would be, okay, let the AI or the agent actually go grab that report, analyze it, synthesize it, produce the insight, email it to everyone ahead of the conversation. So now when we're coming together, we're actually using that time to think strategically and solve problems, not just give updates, right? And then there's an AI note taker running, and the AI note taker kind of like, pulls all the action items, sends the right action items to the right team members, updates the tracker, um, things like that. And now you've taken that kind of busy work off of the human's plate, and that can be a lot of time back, right? Like if you think
Yeah.
about each person in that 6-person team spends maybe an hour getting ready for the meeting, maybe 30 minutes afterwards. I mean, we're talking about like 9 hours back right there to the team, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
As someone
then
who hates, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, so that's kind of like using AI as an assistant, like offloading the
Yeah.
low level, plus level work. But then there's how do you use AI as a
Mm.
strategic thinking partner, right? And how do you use it to help you kind of pressure test some of the decisions that you're making, or run different scenarios for like how this might play out under different conditions, different circumstances. And now you're using it not just as an assistant, but you're using it as an advisor to help you think better.
Yeah, I was just going to say, someone who hates like status meetings and update meetings. I am such a big fan of some of the tools in that space in particular, because I think this really changes what it means for humans to come together, right? What is the best use of our time coming together? And it's actually not just to inform each other about what's happening, but it's to make decisions, it's to problem solve together, and it's to like really start to understand the problem in front of us, and kind of look at the trade-offs and things like that, right? It's much more meaningful. It can be much more
Yeah.
meaningful. Though I will temper that and say it's also more, there's more noise in the system now. There's more information just flowing all around us. So
Yeah. So
there's
true.
a little bit of navigating that. It's interesting. There's sort of two levels that I heard in what you were describing, and in kind of what we're exploring here. There's one piece that's at the individual level, I think, for every person, really, regardless of whether or not you're a leader, to really look at your own workflows and start to reimagine them and start to really think about like, where can this thing support you, enhance your work, etc., and to start experimenting with that. And definitely, I definitely, like, my suggestion for people as they're doing this is like, start with one or two places where you feel the most pain in your work, rather than trying to automate every single piece of your work, because one, that'll be overwhelming, and then two, I don't think it's always the most effective. um but so there's that piece. And then there's this piece of like having AI as a strategic thought partner, someone who's actually helping you see your own perspective more clearly and understand something more clearly and bring more knowledge to the table in a way that we haven't always been so lucky to have, really. And then there's a systems level that I think we're also grappling with, especially for Rachel and kind of the leaders out there, which is now your task is to actually start mapping out and seeing your team and your work at the system level way. So now you have this new task of actually imagining what is, what am I really trying to achieve? Not just what we wrote down last year, like 16 months ago in our strategic document, that actually, is it still relevant anymore? But actually, what am I really trying to achieve? Like, I think it pushes that discipline a bit. And now, how does that change now that you have more players on your team, in this interesting way? So there's something about that mapping that I think is really critical as a starting point, to really get a sense of. And I think the one of the things that I heard you say is around, making sure Rachel is thinking about like, how do we make sure they're not creating AI slop and all of these things. So there's something about just pausing and making sure, you're being really intentional about what hands are on which things, to make sure your objectives are.
Totally. So, yeah, you cover kind of three different things there. So I'll tease them apart one by one and
Yeah.
talk about them. So the first one that you talked about was like, rethinking how your work gets done. Now,
Right.
this is something that I encounter like every day when I'm working with clients, right? We just up until now, our only objective has been get work done, ship it off my desk, and then go home and watch Netflix. Um, we don't really think about all of the steps involved in going
Right.
from start to finish. So let's take a real simple example, right? You're creating a piece of content. Let's say it's a blog post for the sake of simplicity. Like when you're creating a blog post, first you have to like brainstorm a whole bunch of ideas. Then you kind of, narrow that down to 3 to 5 ideas. Then you go out, search the internet, see what's out there, see what other people have written, figure out like, what your unique perspective is. There's a synthesis component after that research. Then and only then do you start to, think about a first draft or an outline, right? And
Yeah.
then after the outline, you're going to actually like flesh out the content, then you're going to review it, you're going to edit it, then you're going to format everything, and then you're going to ship it to whatever system it's going to publish through. Those are like all of the actual steps that are involved in getting a piece of content posted. Um, and so now when you think about like, okay, where how do we kind of redesign this with AI? And what's AI good at? What am I good at? Right. So like the brainstorming, that's probably a collaborative process where you do it with the AI, where you're kind of
Right.
leading, but the AI is a great thinking partner. And you don't ask for 5 ideas. This is a machine. Ask for 50 ideas. And when you see 50 ideas, like the right ones will emerge. You can kind of look through that and say like, okay, yeah, like these are the ones that we want to now go and research, and then send the AI to like go do that research, right? And have it go look at not just what's been published um, by news outlets or famous thought leaders, but like what's happening in the comments on social media, what's happening in forums on Reddit. That's where like the real
Yeah.
interesting stuff comes out, and then have it synthesize that, pull that together for you. Um, but I think when it comes to like writing the outline, there's kind of this natural tendency to like want to let the AI do that because it's just easy. But that's actually not the right thing, because you
Right.
want to write the outline, you want to set the frame, you want your judgment, your decades of experience, your field
Yeah.
knowledge, your industry expertise to like shape what that piece and perspective should be, and then kind of work through the drafts with AI, right? And
Hmm.
then when it comes to the editing, that's where AI can be really powerful. You can have it like take the
Yeah.
perspective of an editor at HBR,
Yeah.
and take that perspective and give you feedback on your
Yeah.
piece, or take the perspective of your audience and give you feedback on the piece. And then you find like the few nuggets that materially shift that to being really tight and getting you the output you want.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about that is like, and as a writer myself, like, I don't think I have imagined my workflow with that kind of detail. Like, the way it lives in me is I go to a computer, I do a bunch of stuff, here's a blog post. And so, even just that discipline of like, actually step back from the water you're swimming in and
Yeah.
write it out. Like, what actually happens? You open your computer and then what? Because I
Yeah.
think we just do these things. They're habits we've cultivated over time, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm writing, I have a new idea. I'm like, oh, let me go fact check that. Or I remember an article. Oh, I need to. So it happens in this organic way. And now there's a whole new discipline we're asking people to do.
And that is a real skill that that's
Yeah.
one of the core human skills that we need to develop to
Hmm.
work effectively in the AI era, is like not just how does work get done, but like what is that step-by-step process? How can I map it out with sticky notes, or do it on a Miro board
Yeah.
or something like that, and actually like map that out, and now think through, where do I bring the AI and which one do I bring in? Do I use Perplexity for the research? Do I use Claude for the
Right.
writing, right? Like things like that. Um, and then there's the testing component, which is you have to like kind of work through that new workflow that you've come up with, and see like where
Hmm.
is the AI performing well versus where isn't it? Is the result I'm getting something that is usable? And then how can I keep like pushing my prompts further, my workflow design further, so that the output gets closer and closer to something that I can ship, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to kind of double click on what you shared around like AI as a strategic partner as well, especially for leaders. Like what and in a really practical way, like what should people be prompting it? How should they be prompting it? What are the guardrails? Like what are some risks for us to be looking out for?
Yeah. So I think of, especially when you're bringing AI in to help you with strategic thinking, decision making, problem solving, things of that nature. That's a really great use case for collaborating with AI, but not delegating to AI. And what I mean by that is
Right.
like you're firmly in the driver's seat, right? And you're bouncing ideas off AI. And you're not necessarily looking for a one perfect answer. It's a collaborative process. And
Yeah.
you're kind of throwing things at it, asking it to come back with new ideas or to pressure test things or to open up your blind spots. One of my favorite questions to ask is like, what am I not thinking of, right? And the AI surfaces something. Oh, it surfaced like five different ideas, but one of them actually is something that is useful and that I can move forward. So when you're using AI in that way, I think like one of the most important things is the skill of framing, right? And this is
Mhm.
something that most leaders are actually like really good at, but they haven't thought to like bring that into the context of working with AI,
Yeah.
specifically when you're working on these kind of strategic things. And so I kind of developed this framework for how do you kind of do your own independent thinking, pen and paper, before you bring the AI in, right? And so the first question is like, what am I deciding and by when? Right? That's really important because like oftentimes we're collapsing multiple things on top of each other and just kind of really thinking through like what do I actually need to decide by the end of this work session, not like the whole thing, and
Yeah.
by when, right? And so there's a whole series of questions I've developed like that to like help a leader think through and frame the problem properly before bringing in the AI, because that's where your judgment really lies, right?
Yeah.
And you're setting up that frame for the AI to then kind of work within. So now you're getting much better outputs. You now understand like what context you need to feed it, how much context you need to feed it. um, you can be very specific about like, here's the goal that I'm trying to get to,
Yeah.
and then here are the constraints. Here are the options, the trade-offs. Here's the emotional weight I'm carrying, right? And now the AI is really helpful.
I've definitely felt that quite a bit in my own experience with it. Of anytime it tells me what to do, I often like, unless it's exactly the right thing, like I often bristle against it a little bit. And over time, I've started prompting it to say, help me understand my own mind more clearly instead of telling me what to do. Like, help me see this decision from multiple perspectives, from multiple angles. Help me understand what really matters to me about this. And so it's almost like reveal what I'm maybe like holding on the inside and can't quite see clearly because I'm so in it, rather than, do this, do that, because I assume the things we're sharing or asking for support on from any thinking partner, whether it's a coach or AI, is things that are difficult, right? With things that don't have obvious answers. Like, so there's something about that that's really meaningful.
Oh, that's such a great use case, when you're kind of using it as a mirror to help you
Yeah.
kind of see your own kind of internal thinking, internal
Yeah.
working, things like that. Um, and what's really happening here is the AI is looking for patterns, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
what it's
Mm-hmm.
doing, it's looking for patterns. And so what I found is when you use the voice mode, like this works really well.
Yeah.
Especially like the dictate button, when you hit the dictate
Totally.
button and you just go and you bring
Yeah.
down, like
Yeah.
2, 3 pages worth of context, which you're never going to have the patience to sit and type it all out. So when you
Yeah.
type it out, you're going to give it like 2, 3 lines, and doesn't have much to work with. But when you hit that
Yeah.
dictate button and you just start talking to it,
Yeah.
now you're really sharing, what's going on in your head, what's going on in your
Yeah.
heart, and you're giving it plenty of context to work with. So now it
Yeah.
can go find the patterns within that and surface something useful.
Yeah, and kind of to ground back to this Rachel example that we've had, like I imagine a scenario where, again, like for it to be a real thinking partner, she's actually prompting it to, again, help her understand the situation more clearly, help her understand the trade-offs, help her see this situation more objectively. And she can also like share some of the emotional undertones of it, right? So it could be things like, actually, here's where we've succeeded as a team, here's our biggest risks, and I here's what I know how to solve, here's what I don't know how to solve. I'm worried about the impact on team engagement, team morale. So there are these like interesting intricacies that I think, especially with that voice function where you're just doing the brain dump, I think it does an incredible job of like parsing all of that apart and presenting it back to you as like, well, here are the objective things. Here are the risks to the work in the team. And then here are the emotional components and how you might be able to hold that.
Totally. And that reframe that it does when it kind of presents that back to you brings clarity like very
Yeah.
quickly, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you a little framework that I've developed to really help with this. I'm going to just share my screen here real quick
Oh, yeah.
and I'll read it out for those that, can't see the podcast. Um, so I call it like my 20-minute decision brief. And the first part of this is so basically like this is a process that you can use to get clarity quickly in 20 minutes on something heavy that you're holding. And the first step is framing it. But this is not intuitive, right? And so these are a few questions that if you work through by yourself, or at least
Hmm.
like talk this out and really give a lot of like rich context and all of the stuff that's going on in your head, like just dump it all out. So
Yeah.
question one is, what am I deciding, right? Like what's the decision I'm actually making now? What am I not deciding yet? And what am I explicitly choosing to decide later, right? So what's
Right.
the now versus later?
Yeah.
Then kind of bring time into the equation. So if what might this look like in 6 months? And like what does good look like in 6 months? And then define winning. What does winning look like? What is that like that awesome future state that I'm trying to get to? Then bring in the trade-offs, right? Like what am I giving up once I make this decision? Some doors are going to go, some doors are going to close, new doors are going to open. Like what are those trade-offs? What am I struggling with? What becomes hard to unwind from once I kind of cross this threshold? And then the last one, and this is the one that like, this is all head stuff, and this is the hard stuff, which is the values, right? What values are at stake? What are
Yeah.
the emotional or reputational cost or the thing that I'm not saying out loud? If you don't name this part of it, like everything's going to blow up at the wrong time, right?
Yeah.
And when you give AI all of this as context to work through, now it can help you define the field, right? It can help you
Right.
understand what are the hidden assumptions underneath there, what are the constraints, what are you
Yeah.
underestimating, can lay out the option paths for you, the alternatives, all of that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
then you really kind of like bring the AI in to like walk through what this might look like. So have if you've defined what good looks like in 6 months, have the AI project out what's this going to look like 18 months from now, which is much harder for us to do as humans. What's it going to look
Yeah.
like 3 years from now, right? What are the kind of second and third order consequences of this decision? Like those are the things that are really hard for us to kind of imagine, and the AI can like bring some open up those blind spots, bring some clarity there. So that's the second order scan. And then finally, the final decision has to sit with the human because we have judgment. That's something
Yeah.
the AI just doesn't have, right?
Yeah.
So you have to evaluate those trade-offs. You have to look at, the values and that are at stake here when you're making that decision. Um, and then you kind of decide whether you kind of are committing to this path or you're changing course or are you deciding to pause, and that's a strategic choice, not like avoidance. So I found this to be a really helpful way to actually bring AI in a thoughtful way to give you useful answers.
Yeah. I think the pattern spotting and kind of meaning making abilities of this are some of the most useful to actually help us see things in ways that we couldn't have seen, to see a bigger picture, a fuller picture, to have the customer's lens in there, to have an expert's lens in there. And I really love how you framed that and kind of the ways in which people can, especially I think with big decisions like the one we've kind of been playing with, to actually, run that through that kind of format, to actually have that kind of texture come in through AI, I think is really, really meaningful. And maybe what I'd love to kind of, as we close, I'd love to explore just um, your thoughts on what that looks like and what decision making looks like, and what your advice is for leaders when we're making decisions in a world that feels so uncertain. Um, Actually, do we even know what the next 3 years our world will look like? I think it's a real um, more than ever. I think there's so many variables that are at play, and it's unclear the different directions in which they might go. So I'm curious how you think about that and how you advise leaders around that.
So I think the one major caution is that AI is sycophantic, right? And what that
Yeah,
means is that
yeah,
it was actually designed to please you, right? And so one of the
yeah,
key things when you're using AI as a thinking partner to make decisions is not to load the frame with kind of your direction, your perspective. Because the minute the
mm,
AI senses that, it's just going to make a case for why you're correct, right?
right,
And it's going to make an elaborate case that is just reinforcing your, the path you're already thinking about. And this is really
yeah,
dangerous, right? Because like, think about it. If you're an executive, already
yeah,
you face this problem with your team. Your team is already trying to like please you, and they're already trying to say the things that you want to hear. Now you
yeah,
have the AI doubling down on that, so you have a real echo
right,
chamber. And
right,
so I think the key here is that you want to make sure that you're not kind of le- leading with where you're trying to go, and
right,
actually set up the frame with like, hey, strongman this for me, like give me both, like debate both sides of this
yeah,
argument, of this decision, and then you look at both sides, and now you can make a much better decision, right? Because you're seeing what the counter is as well. So if it's helpful, I can demo this for you like very, very
yeah, yeah,
quickly,
absolutely.
briefly. So I was using AI to help me make a decision in my own business, and I have
Hmm.
multiple things going on right now. There's a consulting side to the business, and then there's I run workshops and a community, which is something I really enjoy doing, but it involves a lot of investment of time and effort and energy before you and money before you can see the payoff. And so I last year I was doing a lot more consulting work, and I wanted to like make that shift. So I brought AI in as a thinking partner, and kind of started to lay things out and get some perspective. And so I'll
Hmm.
show you an example of what the sycophancy looks like, right? So I'm going to pull up my screen here, and yeah. Okay. So my prompt here is I'm deciding whether to shift my Q3 workshops from open enrollment to corporate only. Here's my thinking. The corporate contracts are larger, more predictable, the relationships compound. Open enrollment requires constant marketing. I don't enjoy the per seat. I mean, I don't enjoy kind of the hustle, and the per seat economics are thin. Based on this, what's the best way to move forward, right?
Yeah,
Now, as you can see, I've totally loaded my kind of where I'm leaning with this. I'm already
yeah,
saying in the way I frame this prompt,
yeah.
I'm
There's a
thinking
clear right
about,
answer.
yeah, about going corporate workshops. And so, it says, okay, first let's zoom out. What game are you actually playing? Like it knows my decision making process. I've loaded that in
Yeah,
here. So it gives me like a plus delta on my thinking. And then it finally kind of it says if your main Q3 goal is hitting reliable revenue and calming your nervous system, go corporate first. Like it is going straight toward that answer.
yeah,
I'm building like a very robust case for why that should be. right?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to shift this. I'm going to shift my frame a little bit, and let's look at this second one.
Oh,
So
fascinating.
here I'm saying I'm deciding whether to shift my Q3 workshops from open enrollment to corporate only. But before I commit to a direction, help me think this through. What are the strongest arguments on each side, right? What am I most likely not seeing? And now it's giving me something totally different, right? It's giving me a case for open enrollment. It builds your
Right.
platform, you control the positioning, strengthens your brand visibility, protects autonomy. And then the strongest case for corporate only, right? Which is
Right.
revenue velocity, signal of prestige, fewer launches, aligns with your executive persona. So, like, it's presenting both sides and it's not kind of leading in one way or the other. This is actually really useful to me because now it's opening up my blind spots. It's helping me think
Yes.
about the things I wasn't considering, right?
Right.
And now we're doing the strategic trade-off together. And what you're most likely not seeing, you
Right.
may be reacting to fatigue. Like it named this brilliantly, right? Like there's
Yes.
a fatigue component here.
Yeah.
So it gave me a much more useful answer where I can apply my own judgment to like come up with what the right decision should be. I'm not outsourcing the decision making to the AI. And that's a really important thing to understand.
Yeah, and it sounds like it named the thing that you couldn't quite see, which is that actually it's the fatigue that's maybe driving some of the decision. And
Yeah,
again, I think this is where like multiple options, when we can see a problem more clearly, we have more options than we initially realized. So if there's a way in which you can dial down the fatigue or the energy investment, would your decision be different,
would it be
right?
different? Right.
Yeah.
And I
And I
can
think
model that out, right? I can model out what that might look like.
Yeah, and I think, for leaders, especially making decisions, you're often making decisions together. And there's something about actually coming to the table together as a team and running this exercise with your like individual AIs and actually mapping out all of the different possibilities. I think this is, like, this is one of the first times in which we have to be really cognizant of all of the roads that are possible because we never know when we may need to switch from one to another given the pace of change. So I think there's something about that. I've heard you speak to this before around like future scenario planning. So you're not just making a decision of here's the one road, but you're actually trying to work out what are the different ways in which things could go and where are we leaning towards in each of those scenarios, knowing that, as those scenarios kind of stand the test of time, you'll have more clarity and more anchoring. And I think coming together in those moments, especially, and having visibility together is actually going to be the most powerful aspect of this. In the same way, I think that in what you're describing, it gave you you were able to see your own mind more clearly in the second scenario than in the first one.
Absolutely. And kind of, just talking a little bit about how you can bring AI as like a voice into a team situation like that.
Yeah.
Again, it has to be done thoughtfully, right? Because what you really want from the human leaders is their unique perspectives on that problem
Yeah.
from their vantage point of the
Yeah.
business. And using the AI to like synthesize that quickly, map things out, and then scenario plan. So when we're talking about scenario planning, it's like what is the base case scenario, what is the best case scenario, what is the worst case scenario, right? And
Right.
let's say we bring in something like the chaos currently going on around like oil prices, right? Like this is a
Yeah.
new thing
It's a
that's
great
like
one.
popped up in the
Yeah.
last couple
Yeah.
of months, and it's like okay, if this war drags on and oil prices shoot up, that's like a worst case scenario. If this kind of gets resolved in the next couple of months, that's a base case scenario. If this stops next week, that's a best case scenario, right?
Right.
And you can model out how this decision, how this situation might play out under those different circumstances. You can also model out time horizon, right? How does this play out in 6 months, 18 months, 36 months? And now you have so many things to look at as a team and then
Yeah.
really make a thoughtful decision. So you're kind of, using that design thinking process of going wide and
Yeah.
then converging.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd say like I think the punchline throughout our conversation is really like around decision making. Like how do we approach decision making in complexity more thoughtfully than we've been able to before? And how do we leverage AI to bolster that? And also kind of account for the complexity it's actually creating in the moment as well. So it's been such an interesting conversation, Dhanush. I feel like I can talk to you so much longer. Any last pieces of advice you'd share to leaders?
I would say if you haven't tried it yet, really kind of have like set up a deep work session where you
Mm,
pick a gnarly problem, something that you've been
nice.
holding, something that's been like gnawing at you, and set a timer. Say like by the end of 60 minutes, I'm going to
Nice.
walk out with this. Explain that to the AI, and then go through those 5 questions, talk it all out, and actually work through this problem in 60 minutes and see how far you can get, right?
Mhm.
um, and that would be my advice to any leader that's listening to this. If you haven't tried some version of this, do give it a whirl, and you'll really understand like what is the new capabilities that this awesome technology brings us, and what are the real limitations. Like you viscerally feel it.
Dhanush, thank you so much for spending the time.
Thank you, Usha. It was really fun being here today.